My name is Soledad Gutiérrez, and I'm Chief Curator at TBA 21. I'm here today to explain you how we are approaching, through digital art and through commissioning art with a stage, some of the most pressing issues of today. As you've seen throughout the day, first with the voice of Marcus Raymond, Chus Martinez, Barbara Casavecchia, and Isabella, you have been how Academy has been working with the ocean. After that, Sofia Lemos, our curator, has introduced you the situation of the Cuban artists, that they are going through different waves of repression. And that shows how we really, from TVA 21, we want to work with the relevant things and those things that really move us, that it's creating spaces for conversation, spaces for exchange, a space for dialogue, and for imagining new futures and alternative futures. One of the reasons why, and this maybe is the reason why we started 1 year ago, in the midst of the pandemic, a stage, the short name from the streaming age, a digital platform that was founded as an emergency fund to support artists and cultural practitioners in trying to avoid cultural loss throughout the pandemic. And I'm today, as I said before, with Asunción Molinos Gordo, that is here with me, and Himali Singh Soin, that we can see her on the screen. Hi, Himali. Both of them have been part of the program of a stage. Asunción is a researcher, artist. She's very close to the anthropology, to the sociology, and she's very much interested on those knowledges and looking for alternatives to less urban-centered practices, very much coming from a rural area and very concerned for other forms of knowledge. With her, we are going to dive deep into the idea of sensing as a way of knowledge. And Himali is a writer, an artist that has been researching deeply into the connections, the metaphors from outer space and the natural environment to construct imaginary cosmologies and interference. Her poetry is really deep and is, I would say, almost the first way of approaching the work. And today we will be exploring with her, through her poetic work, the idea of time, multiple temporalities, and how we can inhabit it. But first of all, I would like to introduce you the idea of a stage, because I think it's really important we understand how we got in contact, how these conversations started, and how we are continuing a practice that started very much moved by Francesca and the desire of change. And that's what we always say. This is a production platform moved by the desire of change, and to keep working with artists and producing new pieces throughout the pandemic. I do remember the first conversations, because Himali was going to have a performance last year in May at the Museo Nacional Thyssen-Bornemisza, and we approached her okay, we are going to keep our commitment. We are going to do something digital. And Himali got back to us digital? A performance? What are we going to do? We need to create a space, we need to create a channel where the work could be really respected, really well presented, and therefore a stage throughout conversations in the first months of the pandemic came up. Asunción was also one of the first artists we approached, and we wanted her to work with us to produce something. Also something that is really important within a stage is that we don't remind the owners of the works. They are part of they belong to the property, they remind to the property of the artist. And that's really important, because we want this production platform to be an actual seed funding to unfold the projects. That means, in the case of Asunción, she's been researching for a while in this. This piece is part of a long-term research, and she has focused on she will explain the work later, but she has decided to work on those aspects. In the case of Himali, she presented some poems. She's going to read one of those poems of the book today. And it was closing the body of work, and that's really important. For example, to Anandre Nguyen, that has been part of the second season, he has than the first visual essay of a body of work to come. That's also something that is very much close to TVA 21 on our practice in terms of commissioning. We spend long time and we establish long-term relationships with the artists. And this is something that I would say it's in the NDA, something that Francesca and Daniela Seaman, artistic director, have been always working for the last 20 years. And I think that's really important to understand our practice and our desire of change through long-term processes in connection with our social and political and environmental ecosystems. On stage, we present the work. We have a weekly program throughout 2 seasons a year, and every single work is accompanied by a series of contextual materials, a podcast that brings us to the wider topic, and it's very much connected with the reason that moved the artist to produce the piece. That interest that makes it, that gives force to the artist to work on that subject and to produce that piece. There is a conversation between the artist and the curator. There is a research cluster, and this is because, again, processes are really important. And there is a call to action, an invitation to support and engage with different organizations that are connected to the causes. And this is also important because with a stage, we want to create a dialogue, not only towards the art context, but also in relation to the society and to the communities that support the artists and where the artists enrooted their practices. And this is also important because with a stage, we wanted to sense reality. We wanted to understand it better. We wanted to see what was happening with the artists throughout the globe. And this idea of creating the connection through the call to action was really important for us. And then we have had the backstage weeks. In fact, all these talks are part of a backstage week where we explain and where we dive deeper into the connections and the narrative created by the artists. And now we're going to go into the talk and we're going to explore the idea of sensing time. Sensing time because time is very much needed in terms of unfolding a process. We manage the time. Also, time is one of the biggest constructions, and sometimes we believe on grasping a linear time, that's what we have been taught. That's what our education has told us. Like there is one day, another day. And that's true, of course. That's how we organize. The moon is organized like that, day and night. But there are other needs and other times that can coexist on creating, producing, but also on producing different kind of knowledges. And in that sense, we will discuss the idea of sensing as a new way or as an old way that we have to go back to produce, to learn, and to inhabit the possibility of creating knowledge. That it's very much enrooted in the practices we are looking at, and that it's very much enrooted on what we are aiming to produce. So I'm going to leave you now with Himali. This is a conversation in 3 times, so in 3 parts. I leave you with Himali, then we will continue with Asunción, and Himali will finish the conversation.
Hello, everyone. I feel like I'm some kind of telepathic presence over there. So in that spirit, I'm going to read a poem called One Photon Falls in Love with Another Photon on a Ray of Light. The poem arises from one of my first weeks arriving in London when I went to the Greenwich Observatory. And every evening at the Greenwich Observatory, where the prime meridian runs and cuts the earth in 2 halves, they turn on a laser that cuts the sky in 2 halves. And they asked me that evening to turn on this switch. I turned on the switch and I realized I had blood on my hands. The same week, I heard a BBC radio show talking about how Indians or India didn't have time till the British Empire brought timetables with the railways. So I started thinking about linear time and its violences. And I imagined this ray of light cutting the sky in half And I thought, what if these two particles on a ray of light fall in love with each other? They cannot meet unless one exits linear time. And I realized that love is potentially one of the only ways that we can exit linear time, the time of extraction, the time of acceleration, the time of colonization. It's with the time of love. One photon falls in love with another photon on a ray of light. Or what is the contemporary remix? 0 degrees, 0000 GMT, the prime meridian. Where we are is everywhere, all of the time. You remember what has yet to occur. Everything is always happening, but you think the world moves without narrative. Isolated and made up of dots, we cannot see beyond ourselves, even as we fall into the same wave that split us in the first place. I move closer and closer and get further and further. All mass, no velocity. A point in some separate space, you disappear without trace. I gaze at your curving countenance furtively, shimmying toward your shadow, pining for your penumbra. The distance between us holds us together, elastic and always on the verge. We bear each point of ourselves toward each other. You multiply away from me and onto your own path. It is love that you are in love with. The subject of your infatuation is secondary. Singular, effaced, you slide through a Mobius strip of possibility and probability, a field of cross signals and missed connections. You are topographical, topological, teleological, telepathic. You are not true. You are mnemonic, measured, misdirected, made up. You are here and then, there and now. Hyperbolic, metempsychotic, apocalyptic, insatiable. You are avian, subterranean, bovine, nimbus, archaeological, meteorological, tautological, late. You are extinct before you ever lived, a fossil from the future. I'll continue the love letter at the end after you both speak.
Qué brutal, ¿eh?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Himali. And I think this fossil of the future is a very interesting connection with the practice of Asunción, because precisely what Asunción is trying to do, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is making sure that the practices, those knowledges that are based on nature, that are based on ancestral practices, on rural wisdom, are not fossils from the future, or in the future we don't see them as a fossil knowledge, that they become, they keep, or they are still alive, and they become part of a wider way for understanding the way, I mean, the nature and how we relate to the world. So, Asunción?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know where to start because, I mean, I'm still really shocked by your poem. Thank you very much. Well, yes, I mean, this idea of the fossil, I mean, when I think it's important that I give a brief about the work, yes, so we can elaborate on an abstract level once you know what we're talking about. So this film is called Barruntaremos. I don't know how many of you know the word in Spanish, barruntar. Is being translated as sensing or presenting. It's like having a very strong feeling that something is about to happen. And this is the word that Pedro Sanz is a cabañuelista, like a methodological, like the math, the time, ¿cómo se diría el nombre del tiempo?
The weatherman.
The weatherman from Segovia. So basically, during the whole life, Pedro, as a shepherd, he has been learning about how to predict the weather by observing the landscape and paying special attention to certain elements, like stones, like the way that the moon shines, when it does, the clouds, the movements of the animals, like a million things. He has the capacity to decode the information that has to do with the weather, whether it's going to rain, it's not going to rain. So this is a practice that is called cabañuelas, and it has been happening in this part of the planet at least since the medieval times. And it has been in practice for shepherds and farmers for generations, and now is a fossil. I mean, now is in the verge of extinction because there's not that many people out there who know about it. So apart from Pedro and a few other people who still does it, this knowledge is on the verge of extinction, and we are in a way like concerned about how it's going to travel in time. So the thing is, it's a knowledge that has been directly withdrawn from the nature and from being able to be outdoors for such a period of time. When you're a shepherd, the time you spend outdoors is pretty much all of the time, except when you're sleeping. So you really have the capacity to, through your life experience, withdraw all of these conclusions. So this is something that you don't learn in academy. Nobody's, like teaching you how to do it. You have, the tradition from, in his case, it was his family who taught him how to do it. And then he just practiced, and he says in the video that in the last 15 years, he has been doing it without support. So the thing is, the way he does it is very accurate. And I had this idea of comparing, the way that we are doing it today in terms of energy. Now in order to know what's the weather like, we have to create a satellite with all of the energy that involves, put it out of the planet in this orbit, start getting pictures of the whole thing, and trying to, by algorithms, figure out what's going to happen. If we have a Pedro in every, county or in every area, it will be so, energy efficient, in the sense like you will have people that are living antennas that can actually gather all of this knowledge, and also affects the way that we relate to our home, like this planet. So one of the things that Pedro was continually highlighting, was how ignorant we were, when I remember when we started filming. And although I had a little knowledge on cabañuelas, every time we keep asking questions, he was really upset about how ignorant we were. How totally unaware is but you don't know that this thing is happening. So this whole idea about who is the ignorant, when in this country shepherds are being treated still until this day like the last men on earth, and being accused of ignorant and backwarder, suddenly it was being reversed. The artist and the art crowd, the sound man and the camera woman, we are being the ones who are completely clueless, and we are going through this learning, this process of learning. So, we can go in so many directions. Maybe you can throw me a question and I can...
You have spoken about two things that I think are really relevant in terms of, first of all, high or elevated knowledge, the fact that the landscape becomes an instrument and a very important tool that we are very much used to it. When we think about being in an art fair, all the canvas, all the landscapes we are going to see throughout, or when we go to a classical museum, mostly is based on landscapes. And that was one of the things you were very interested on, and was how landscape was treated throughout history, and how a different meaning it has when you speak about cabañuelas and you speak about the knowledge that it's based on that landscape. And in fact, the piece is not so much about Pedro speaking, it's about Pedro choosing what are the signs and what are the elements out of that landscape that makes it that inform him his weather predictions, no?
Yeah. Coming from a tradition of art, as you said, when in the history of representation and representing landscape, aesthetics were this kind of gray cloth that is on everything. in a way that you can only see landscape either because it's sublime or because it's beautiful or because it has all of these aesthetical elements. But most of the information about landscape that has to do with, like politics or economy or, like social life, there are being in a way deleted just by the representation. So I thought, how can we work from landscape in a way that, working with someone like Pedro could disclose all of the methodological information on every element, and how it could not be just something to admire or to aestheticize, or it could be something that it could reveal other layers of meaning.
Yeah, that also something I think it's really interesting, no? And it addresses or it connects in a way with We Are Opposite Like That, the series of Himali, Thinking Out Loud, about the relationship, her own relationship with the landscape, no? How you go to the Antarctica, how you find your brown, We Are Opposite Like That is about that encounter with a weird landscape and how you inhabit it from a queerness perspective, no? How queer could be inhabiting a landscape. And in that sense, the landscape of Pedro is very much based on the everyday life and on the everyday knowledge of the place. Mm-hmm. And there is another element that it's important in relation to the learning, that it's this idea of occupying learning. We were in the podcast, and that's again going back to a stage. It's really important to go to the wider topic. To what are we talking, or what moves you, the artist, in your case, Himali, or many of the other artists that have taken part to work with this subject. And in your case was very much this idea of giving place to those knowledges that are not taught in a school. And maybe if you could expand on that.
Yeah, one of the stronger influences in my practice is this mathematician from Palestine called Munir Fashe, and he talks about the occupation of knowledge. And I very much like what Himali was saying about, like the British bringing up time into India, and there wasn't any time before, as another form of occupation. So, when Munir, I really advise you all to go and listen to Munir. He talks about, the knowledge that is being generated directly from each one of us, everybody here in this room, directly, that it comes from our life experience, is being taken something like an anecdote or something that is not really relevant, but the knowledge that we acquire, like in a university or in an academy, when we are actually paying a sum of money to get a degree or some kind of certification. So he was talking about education as a form of colonialism and as a form of extending this idea of occupying knowledge. So when you have communities that are sovereign, that have the capacity to generate knowledge and to withdraw within this knowledge a form of inhabiting the world, then you have another group of people who is going to remove or is going to make fun of the way you create ideas, or is going to make fun of the way that you don't have time suddenly, or you don't have manners, manners, for instance. Manners is another form of colonization. Or social behavior. So, all of these are crossing paths in the way that I like to really understand rural cultures, at least in this country. I think they're very well understood when we look at them also through the lenses of colonialism or occupation. Not necessarily by another nation who comes here and takes over and then it rules, but rather, like the urban mindset or the post-industrial cultures taking over the rural and telling us again the way we should live life or the way we should relate to our territory, until the point that the level of sovereignty that we have is almost coming to also an end. This is one of my main concerns. What is this cultural colonization that the urban centers have over the rural? There are many cases from the amount of paperwork that we have to do. That farmers have to do. For instance, one of the best examples about the comparison between a normal satellite and Pedro. The advantages of having a normal satellite is the fact that you can photograph the entire farming land in this country, and you can find the farmers who are farming different crops from the ones they registered in the PAC. The PAC is Política Agraria Común. In English, I think it's CAP, the other way around, the Common Agriculture Policy. So this is something Pedro cannot do. Pedro cannot provide the SIGPAD, the recording of the satellites, who is mischief making when they are cheating by growing different crops in the fields, in order to get this, the subsidy, but the satellites do. So at the end of the day, I mean, I like to understand technology also as a multifunctional device that sometimes is it telling you, like it's like this control remote. It's telling you that it was actually doing is, I don't know, exchanging the images of the window. But at the same time, it has like a default or like another kind of job embedded in it. So also when we think about, like technologies in general, and this idea of multi-function, I think there are a lot of things hidden in there.
And this is also something like one of the main challenges, no? Like it seems something sometimes like kind of the most radical knowledges are those that sometimes are already existing because the idea and something you do also a lot in your work, and I think it can also relate to Himali's practice, is the fact of questioning progress and what does progress mean, and innovation. No, that's another idea we have discussed a lot. Like sometimes we have to create a space for other ways of doing. And not saying it's bad, or it's not a romantic idea of before everything was better. It's like let's learn and respect what we already know and build from there, and being able to integrate other forms.
Yeah, I mean, the keyword, again, as you said, is innovation. You know how we many times think about innovation, again, as something that can only happen from specific minds, those who are recognized and trained to be the experts. And then the category of experts, what happens when it shifts to someone like Pedro? Like if he's all over the TV, like at the beginning of every year, every TV in this country talks to him to know what's the weather like. But the way that he's being addressed is like, in my opinion, is like this peculiar guy from the countryside who knows how to do these magic things, which is predicting the weather. That is nothing to do with magic. It's just about wisdom and paying attention and drawing conclusions, which is something that scientists do continuously, and they are not being questioned. It's also by, like all of this power game that exists within who is the knowledge producer, the one who is actually recognized, or the one that is packed by an empire, like the empire that brings time, or the empire that brings language, in our context. I really leave it up to you to draw your own conclusions about innovation.
And this, as I said before, is a long path, no? Because it's not a project that just came up. You have been researching throughout different practices, throughout different knowledges. You are, for example, now very much focused on water. That's something we have been dealing a lot with on stage, no? Like the different uses, the property of water, things that are sometimes ungraspable in your mind, no? How anyone can own the water, that's a huge problem in Chile, and we have worked through the work of Patricia Dominguez, we have approached that. I don't know if you want to expand on the different aspects you have been looking at or you have been working into through this research.
Yeah, for instance, the last project I did for the IBAM Museum had to do with the irrigation system put in place by the Arab communities that move in Valencia. And especially, like, since we are talking about knowledge production, how it has taken 500 years to recognize who is the origin, what is the origin of this system of irrigation that is extremely efficient. And it has lasted alive until these days, and it's just like recently now that Ferran Esquilache has scientifically proved that the origin of the irrigation systems put in place in the Huerta de Valencia, one of the best recognized farming regions in the world, has been put in place by farmers and not by engineers of Islamic origins. So, this is one of the different projects that I has been doing that has to do with water. And then recently now that you can still see in Travesía 4, is an evolution of this project that has to do with the alfarería del agua and the amount of thought and ideas that have been put together in creating all of these vases and artifacts to contain water, thinking that is of a common property and not something to restore or to store and to put away from the system, but something to share and Yeah, and to have for the public.
And now, thank you. I'm going to give voice to Himali, that I think she wanted to intervene before continuing with the poem. I was texting with her just to bridge this gap, technological, this distance between London and Madrid.
Thank you. What both of you are talking about is so interesting. And it made me think, your stories about Pedro made me think that I've just learned that the term astrological forecasting actually comes from weather forecasting. And so it makes me think that obviously there are these interesting connections between older ways or different ways of predicting the future and the weather. And what is Pedro doing by being able to sense a forecast with his body? He's being a bird, right? He is being more like a bird. And birds don't only sense the immediate rain that's coming, but they also migrate because they have a sense of long time climate. And if I can garner anything from that, it makes me just think about how some of the technologies that you're talking about are short-term capital gains, whereas these different ways of sensing time are also thinking about long-time processes. What are people and beings of the future, the deep future, or even the deep past going to be and feel like? That was just a short interlude. I'm going to continue with the poem. The poem is called, in case anyone wasn't there for the beginning, the poem is called One Photon Falls in Love with Another Photon on a Ray of Light. I am solitary and seismic. I transmit energy pulsing across scrims and wormholes, circuiting through currents of code, golden data zigzagging across reason, tracing orbs of darkness and insects and the tips of trees. You are an inscription of breath. I want to make love to you and self-destruct into a dash of dust, but in a 21st century kind of way. Parallel, looking into each other's eyes, no touch. Opulent with what we hide. Dry-mouthed assertions, oscillations through belts of magenta and gardens of pixelated goodbyes. We are strings that weigh nothing, freezing and losing our way at some bare elevation, no exit and always away. We are strings that weigh nothing. Our bodies are brighter than our theories, links like condensations, trails in the sky. I seek you again and again, picturing our brief or impossible reunion. A fugue in F major, versions of waiting, the thin decimals before the cadence, the earth malfunctioning between its axis and the tilt. Exhausted by existing outside time, I laugh. You are serious, but I am laughing because there are holes everywhere. I have traveled knots and miles and returned. I have no way of knowing if I passed you in my escapement, in my persistent reconciliation with time. Distance, what we have here, is seeping into everywhere. There is no third person except time. Nothing is always also happening. Everything is a single thing. Anything brushing up against all things. In the distance, on the outskirts, sometimes very close by, sometimes light years away, accumulating imaginary marks, now cyan, apophatic, and anastrophic at once. You are the opposite of everything. A conclusion before a premise. You are more and less than every sound and all that it can comprise, almost, already, always, this and that. Where everything is so much, we live in each other's wake, in a state of either and or, in reams and reams of language.
Thank you very much. I don't know if anyone has any questions. If not, I have one. I mean, it's like, okay. Yes, I have.
Actually, I would like to ask the artists, since you've participated in stage, and what has your experience been? Have you had any feedback? Has the opportunity of working in a cluster of, like a research cluster, these podcasts that we've curated along with your work, and the effort that TBA 21 put into giving a strong context to the message that you are trying to get across, rather than leaving us in some form of intuitive relationship with the work, where we have to draw from the work our own conclusions, like you do when you walk around an art fair or a biennial. And the actual opportunity of working online gives us that chance to spread out and investigate things and create several points of entry. At least that was the effort that we were making in this, apart from keeping a relationship going with the artists that we like to work with during the pandemic. That's obviously a part of it. But how did it feel for you to be part of stage? That's my question.
I felt very well looked after, to be honest, because we had so many things happening, and the whole process from the beginning, it was very good also because, everything you mentioned, no? How it's not just like an artwork that is being displayed and then what? It's a great tool for other people who want to research and who can have this tool that it has like multiple doors that open you places where to go. And something that it was very funny, that it was forever to explain to me, to Pedro, what the stage was. Because at the beginning he was like, the TV, when are you going to play this on the TV? It's like, Pedro, there's no TV. This is, it's an art institution, it's an artist context. And then it was through his family that he learned also about what it meant and the value of, and then he got even more excited because he knew that he could access a different audience himself, as a creator, as an artist himself. So he got very excited through his niece, who actually explained, what is a museum, what is the Thyssen, because he, as a shepherd, was unaware of many things that had to do with the cultural world. And then through this, he became really excited, and now it's like, okay, when are we going to continue? So, and I think you have an invitation for his next birthday. Yes, the 20th of June 2022. So in this sense, it has been very good, and working with the team the same way, going through all of the, the difficulties that we had at the beginning, especially working on this really troubled year for everybody.
Yes. And maybe we can extend the question also to Himali, because it was very much, we always say, like, you've been like one of the instigators and the responsibles of that stage happening. So I don't know if you want to get back to Francesca on that.
That's a lot of weight I carry. For me, it was like therapy. Because we were all kind of collectively going through so much in the beginning, and here were these people telling you, don't subdue everything that you're feeling and going through. Don't turn your back on it. Face it and make it into something. Chisel it. So that to be able to process raw emotion in that way and to be encouraged to do so was actually a way that we didn't have to talk about different ways of knowing. We could practice it, practice the theory that we have been reading. And then the call to action for me was a radical moment that actually has shifted my entire practice, because now I can't really imagine making a work of art without having a parallel initiative where I can actually try to feed back into the community in some way or the other.
Thank you.
Quería hacer una pregunta, bueno, en relación al tiempo, al concepto de tiempo, que nos hemos educado todos en un tiempo lineal y aprendido, y las dos, de alguna manera, las dos artistas, uno en sus poemas y otro en su trabajo, desmanteláis de alguna manera este concepto de tiempo. Pero ¿cuál sería la solución a nivel...? Bueno, esto es una pregunta absurda que no tiene solución, yo creo, pero ¿cómo nos salimos, ¿no? Los seres humanos a nivel diario, ¿no? A nivel doméstico, cómo nos podemos salir de las barreras del tiempo que hemos generado, porque nos hemos educado y hemos aprendido un tiempo constante, nos han educado en un tiempo y luego en nuestra vida adulta estamos luchando continuamente por salirnos de un sistema de tiempo concreto. Me parece interesantísimo, o sea, que sé que es una pregunta difícil y que no tiene respuesta, pero ¿de qué manera? Quizá a través de la poesía, a través del arte es un modo, ¿no?
I can give you an answer from my perspective. I mean, I don't know what's the general solution, but I know what I do personally. My solution to deal with, how time is structuring me and my mind, I try to think in the same way that the shepherds think, or my father as a farmer thought, which is long-term thinking. And a time that it doesn't end with my lifetime. For instance, my father has been planting trees that he knew he will not collect anything from them. And he still kept doing it. Because, in the rural communities, at least the ones I know, the way we play with time is more ambitious. It's not just, okay, until I die, that's not the end. I mean, we have to think far, we have to think about overcoming, all of these technical frontiers that have to do with, I am 30-something year old, I have to do such and such because it's the time. All of these other complexities. I remember a friend of mine who is from South Africa. He was telling me how his mother was a lot freer because she didn't know what her birthday was. So as long as we start relating time to our personal, our lifetime, which also still we don't know how long is left, but I try to think about our actions as if we have no death. There's no death, or we don't die whenever is our personal, thinking, try to build time as a collective action and as a personal action that overcomes our personal time here in this form, inside this body, and how can our actions now can transcend by transforming it in a cultural form, like the way the cabañuelas, who invented this thing? Whoever did it, it was not one person for sure. It had to do with something being common. When it really goes down into the culture, then it can last, and can be as a living organism for much longer. So if we could transcend, personally, these are my tricks, the way I lie to myself. But in general, collectively, just by thinking about it and by trying to dismantle, where are the breaks and when you're trying to think about something and you find a block, analyze the nature of the block. If that's a real one or is an artificial one, and it has been implemented by an empire or by, like a habit or by a demand, and try to overcome this demand. I don't know.
Himali, do you have personal tricks on challenging our learned notion of time?
I guess for me, through language. And this book, for example, We Are Opposite Like That, opens this way, and then you have to flip it to read it the other way. A graphic designer told me that it's a graphic designer's nightmare and an English teacher's worst disaster. And for me, that's the highest level of compliment, because there we start with decolonizing so that we can jump in and jumble and juggle language and intervene with words and allow the same language that has been a language of occupation and colonization to then do that decolonial work for us. So for me, that's the measure of poetry and metaphor, that it can take us through maybe some of the long time thinking that you're also talking about. It can carry us across different periods, but it can also intervene with meaning and non-meaning, so that at some point it becomes illegible to those that are trying to extract value from it.
And I have, if there are, okay.
Quería daros las gracias a todas por vuestras intervenciones, me ha parecido súper interesante. Y te quería preguntar, Asunción, me ha parecido muy interesante justo lo que estabais comentando ahora también, de cómo hacía esa asociación del colonialismo o de la ocupación de los espacios rurales a través de una perspectiva urbana, y ponerlo en relación con lo que estabas comentando de los satélites y otras formas de predecir y de analizar y poder sentir esos cambios de tiempo, ¿no? Y me gustaría saber, a través de la propia práctica artística que tú usas y toda la digitalización, el uso de nuevas tecnologías y demás, esos dos polos que normalmente se analizan como muy polarizados entre lo que sería pues, lo urbano, lo rural o las prácticas más tradicionales, etcétera, y los usos tecnológicos, de alguna manera también se podría entender pues, que estos satélites están colonizando la actividad que otra serie de personas venían haciendo durante siglos, utilizando otro tipo de herramientas y de recursos. ¿Cómo entra tu práctica en relación con esa politización y si de alguna manera la desmantela, o sea, si de alguna manera el uso de la tecnología, de la forma en la que tú lo aplicas, sirve para hacer un acercamiento entre tanto lo urbano y lo rural, como entre formas más tradicionales y formas más alternativas, y si es como una manera de establecer un diálogo o una comunicación?
See, well, I don't have like one particular way of using technology. I mean, since I don't have like one technology that I use or one medium that I use, I normally choose the medium of the technology according to the audience. So the question I made is, okay, who is going to access the word? Whether it's an online platform, is going to be like in a specific city, or is going to be in a museum, or and what is the tools that the audience has to access the work. And according to that, I formulate something. Sometimes I use technology, sometimes I don't. Like one of the projects that I did years back, I turned like a shepherd's house that was made of stone into a camera obscura for anybody who could access it to see the landscape inverted, and that was a decision that it was based on the accessibility, having a very old and easy technology involved in the project. And so I don't really have like one way of doing it. I like to think of myself a little bit, I mean, this is a bit my mental trip, okay? Like como un cirujano, no? Like a surgeon. So rather than having, this is my practice, this is the way I do things, it's like, okay, this is the occasion, this is what we're going to do. How can we work, or what can it be done, you know, in the best way, according to the given circumstances, to deal with all you know, the description that you said about, you know, the rural, the urban, because it's so intricate that I don't think there is one for all. At least I don't have it. I don't know if somebody, yeah. I don't know if I answered your question at all.
Okay, so I think it's your last chance. And otherwise, I'm going to thank you very much, Asunción and Himali, for making the effort of sharing like a virtual presence. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Asunción. And thank you very much to you all for being here.